I don't know. It seems like my baby isn't acting the same as he usually does. I think something might be wrong with him.
I am your baby. Goo goo gaga.
Hey, nerd! Welcome to Where the Streetlights End. I'm here to talk to you about something unpleasant and unsettling again. One of the most common things someone comes across when studying or talking about folklore is the Fae, the fair folk, fairies. In some cultures, there are boatloads of strange entities that do weird stuff, and they're all basically a type of freaking fairy. There is far too much to discuss regarding the Fae in general, but I'd like to talk at you about one specific type of fairy today, and one from Ireland. Ire is the land with the most Fae creatures in their stories. I want to tell y'all about Changelings. But before I get into it, I'd like to humbly request that you give the video a like, click that subscribe button, and comment down below to join in the conversation. I like doing this and occasionally need some validation that it's worth my damn time. Also, for those of you who care, stick around to the end for personal updates. I know that it's cheesy and I hate when people say it, but I cannot lie, there are big changes coming. Hopefully not to the content or anything, but big changes happening. Pretty exciting. I don't know. I'm gonna tell you a terrible story. So, Bridget Cleary was a successful seamstress and dressmaker who lived in Ireland. She was born in 1869 and was married to a man who worked as a craftsman, making things out of wood. His name was Michael. After being married, Bridget moved in with her parents again while her husband continued to work in a different town. While the couple were living separately, Bridget found a great deal of independence and success out on her own. Her dressmaking skills were improving. She was raising her own chickens and selling eggs to the people in her community. She was thriving, really. When her mother died, Bridget and her husband Michael came together to care for her elderly father. Thanks to her father's work throughout his life, they were able to get themselves into a very nice house, and things were going rather swimmingly. They had a secure and enviable home. Bridget's dressmaking had become well known, and she was getting a great deal of business for herself. Sorry, I'm a little bit coffee today. But then, Bridget was reported missing in March of 1895. According to her family members, she had been ill recently and was diagnosed with bronchitis. She had been suffering from illness for over a week before a doctor came to visit her and to assess her health. Unfortunately, the doctor believed that she was doomed and her illness was far too advanced for her to recover. A priest then came shortly after to perform last rites. Everyone firmly believed that Bridget, the feisty and successful woman, was not long for this world. Her friends and loved ones poured over her with a variety of remedies and cures that they hoped would save her life, but nothing seemed to work. Yet she did keep on keeping on. Some time went by and she had not died, nor had she gotten any better. Her father and husband then decided that this creature in their home must not be Bridget at all. But it was a fairy who had taken on her face and taken her place. They believed that this was not their wife or daughter. She was a changeling. They threw urine on her and held her up against a fire as they tried to force the fairy to leave her body. By March 16th, the town was abuzz with rumor that Bridget had gone missing, and when police came around looking for an answer to these chirpings, her husband, Michael, claimed that she had been taken away by fairies. Then, about a week later, Bridget's body was found in a shallow grave, her corpse burnt to a crisp and thrown unceremoniously into the earth. Sorry about that weird pause there. I had to, literally pause the recording and cough a lot. But I'm back, I promise. The coroner announced the following day that the cause of death was burning. She was burned alive. until she wasn't alive anymore. Sorry, that's not funny. A trial was held to administer justice for what had been done to Bridget, and 9 people were charged as having some involvement in Bridget's murder. A grand jury indicted 5 of them for murder in July of that year, including her husband Michael Cleary, her father, Patrick Boland, and 3 others, Mary James and Patrick Kennedy. According to the evidence and testimonies taken throughout the trial, the story that was put together goes as thus. On March 15th, Michael summoned Father Ryan to the Cleary household. Bridget was very much alive, but in a really bad mood. Michael told the priest that he didn't believe the medicine that the doctor had prescribed would work, so he hadn't been bothering to give it to her. According to Father Ryan, Michael Cleary then claimed that natural remedies and ideas brought up by their friends would probably work better than doctor's medicine. Hey, I know people like this. The priest gave Bridget communion and left. Later that night, people came to the house and ended up embroiled in a heated conversation about fairies. Bridget had apparently had quite enough of her husband's nonsense and started talking shit back to him, saying that his mom was the one who had been taken by fairies, not her. She continued to insist that she was not, in fact, a fairy, and that Michael was an idiot for saying that she was. Fair enough, right? This ended up with her husband and her father pretty much torturing her. They were trying to force feed her things, waving burning pieces of firewood at her, and threatening her. Michael threw kerosene on her, and she ignited. Friends and neighbors who were in the house that night claimed that they weren't sure whether Bridget was still alive or not at the time she was set ablaze, because the fighting had... Okay, honestly, the torture had been so chaotic and intense up until that point. I imagine this means she wasn't mobile or, like, fighting back at the time she was lit up. Yeah? God, it's horrible. However, while some of them made moves to try to put the fire out and stop her from burning, Michael supposedly held everyone back and would not allow them to try. He kept saying that she was a changeling, and that by burning her, he would be able to get his real wife back from the fairy realm. Sounds like psychosis. The jury at the trial was brought out to view Bridget's body. They brought out to view Bridget's body in an attempt to help them understand that the reality of what had been done to this poor woman. They were able to confirm her identity, and they saw the extent of her injuries and the burns. They were easily convinced that Bridget had been made to suffer terribly before she was killed. Sounds about right based on what we've heard until now, yeah. The people who had been present during the night she was murdered were mostly convicted of wounding her. Basically, that's like old school assault charges, right? One of the defendants had his charges dropped. Others were given 6 months to 3 years of labor. Michael Cleary, however, the husband, was found guilty of manslaughter and got 20 years of penal servitude. Penal servitude. Manslaughter is an interesting choice. It may have meant something different in the 1890s in Ireland, but these days in the US, manslaughter is typically for accidentally killing someone. I guess if they really bought his story that he thought she was a changeling, I suppose it could make sense. But I personally don't believe that he actually thought she was a changeling. And here I'll tell you why. It's the slowest dramatic spin. So, you remember how I mentioned that she was a super successful seamstress and that people started really loving the dresses that she made? She, Bridget Cleary, had actually become self-sufficient financially. She had also grown very skilled at raising chickens and was making good money selling the eggs. She was very well loved and respected within her community, and she had a lot of friends. Honestly, she was the breadwinner, and she was very independent emotionally as well. She was the one making most of the money. She was in that relationship. I firmly believe that her husband, who was a cooper, just a dude who made stuff out of wood, was feeling emasculated by her. I think that he was pissed that she didn't rely on him, and her success made him feel like less of a man. I believe that her very existence grew to offend him, and he, knowing the common belief systems within his community, saw that when she got sick, it could be very easy to convince people she was actually a fairy and get away with doing away with her. That a changeling had taken the place of his wife, and therefore he could get people on his side about killing her, pass it off as an accident because he and others truly believed that she was not his lovely wife Bridget at all. That's what I think. Tell me why I'm wrong in the comments down below. So, fairies have remained prevalent entities in folklore for many different cultures and across many different regions of the world. Most commonly, they are referenced as being part of European folklore, particularly from areas of Britain and Scandinavia. Like in the case of the story I just told you, Ireland has been especially fond of the fairy tales? Whoa, I get it now. Fairy tales. While each culture has its own idea of what fairies are, how they behave, and what their motives may be, a certain kind of fairy tends to be pretty similar across the board. Changelings. Now, other cultures have entities that are basically fairy, they fit the exact same description as the Irish or the European fairies, right? But they call them different things. Probably if I ever talk about them, I'll be like, that sounds like a fae, but from this culture, that's interesting. That's fae shit. So, just to let you know that part. Anyway, changelings. They are a type of fairy that are believed to kidnap human children and take their place in the family home. Some believe that not only children are in danger of being snagged by the fairies, however, and that they are drawn to any beautiful humans regardless of their age. Pretty much anyone who may be perceived as fair or attractive is essentially fairy bait in this regard. It has historically been mostly children and women who have been supposed victims of the old supernatural switcheroo. If we go off of the purely folkloric explanations, this is likely just because women and children tend to be prettier, that have more fair skin, thicker hair, etc. If the dominant cultural narrative is from heterosexual men, the culture in general isn't going to perceive men as being the most beautiful people in the community. You catch my drift? From a more analytical standpoint, this may be because within the society, women and children were less apt to be able to explain changes in their appearance, attitudes, and health, either lacking the vocabulary to explain what's happening to them or lacking the authority to have their explanations believed by others. Either way, like I said, it is believed that changelings mostly take the place of children. There are several different theories that have evolved in an effort to explain why changelings decide to kidnap and take the place of human children. A common belief is that when fairies are near the end of their life and they begin to wither and die, they can regain their youth if they are cared for by mortals and are fed human food. By switching the human child out with an elderly fairy, that fairy is given a chance to replenish its life force. This is super creepy to me. You think you're cuddling with and feeding your baby, your human baby that you made with your body or whatever, but it's actually this 500-year-old shape-shifting entity from another dimension who's using you like an unpaid nurse. That's unpleasant. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Another explanation is that fairies abduct human children to raise as one of their own, to then treat them as breeding stock, like for food. Or this may be done in order to keep the fairy bloodlines alive without inbreeding. A third idea, which is prevalent in Scotland, is that fairies once struck a deal with the devil, granting them some advantage that only evil could provide, and in exchange they must sacrifice a living child to him every 7 years. It is believed that rather than sacrifice one of their own children, fairies prefer to take a human child to offer as a tithe to the devil. This is a very interesting twist to the belief system, because in this you can see where the older pagan beliefs began to merge with Christianity. This has been pretty common throughout the world, and in particular in the British Isles, in the about 400s, like 400 AD, that century-ish. Yes, Christianity was spreading through the area, but people were having a really hard time converting the pagans in the north, as in around Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. So in order to get them to agree to loving Jesus or whatever, the church dudes would often convince the pagans that there were ways to believe in the teachings of Christianity without abandoning their long-held pagan belief systems. And this led to some really interesting ideas that combined old superstitions and traditions with Christian stuff. And I always find that sort of thing quite fascinating. It's one of my favorite things to read about. Anyway, a more straightforward and practical explanation is that the fairy children are wild, temperamental, and awful to raise. In contrast, human children tend to be more gentle and easier to care for. If you've ever had a toddler, you know that if they believe this, then their children must be really chaotic. But, like, knowing what fae are, yeah, probably. Fair enough. Therefore, fairies will sometimes trade their children with humans simply because their own kids were driving them nuts. So they basically drop off their own kids with a human babysitter, snatch up the human baby, and just kind of wait for their kids to grow up enough to come home on their own, or just go off and do their thing. Most beliefs surrounding changelings suggest that someone can be captured and replaced with an imposter at any time. This implies that all children are perpetually in danger of fairy abduction, as well as particularly pretty adults. Most often the switcheroo will take place in the night while the victims are asleep. If people report seeing or otherwise interacting with fairies or the little people, it is likely to mean that they have been marked as a target and may be taken away very soon. The imposters who've taken the place of your child or loved one aren't always fairies. In some cases, the child may be replaced with an inanimate object, such as a block of wood or a large stone that would be enchanted to look like and act like a human child. This was more likely to be believed in cultures that had no reason to expect fairies themselves would have any reason to live among the humans, but that they only needed the mortal child. Like how I was talking about how in Scotland at some point they began to believe that the fairies needed to sacrifice a child to keep their magical devil powers. Well, the cultures like that would be the ones that would take the child and give them a log instead, because they don't have anything to gain from having a fairy live with the human family, right? They just need the baby for evil reasons. So, there are some signs and symptoms that one might look for in a changeling, or if you are worried that your child isn't a changeling. That's so terrifying to even think that you could think your child is a changeling. Like, what would you do? Like, if your baby starts like your 5-year-old just starts acting weird, and then you think that it's a monster and not your child at all. That's so sad. Okay, continuing. Signs and symptoms. There are many details that parents or family members would recognize in their loved ones that would be evidence that they've been replaced by a changeling. The first telltale sign that someone is a fairy double is a sudden change in their personality. They may become more aggressive, start to misbehave, or become uncharacteristically morose or solemn. In infants, One sign is constant crying or being persistently fussy. Because fairies are known to have bad attitudes, it could follow that if someone suddenly adopts a negative personality, they may in fact be a fairy. Sudden and prolonged illness was another way to recognize a changeling. That's probably the long-lasting illness of Bridget Cleary is probably what they used. They're like, oh, she's been sick for like 2 weeks. It's not a human anymore. If an unexpected and unidentified illness befalls someone, especially an infant or a child, it is likely that they were an elderly fairy disguised as the individual. Other signs include an infant's features changing on them, or them looking old or haggard like an old man or woman, looking pale or sickly, unbridled hunger, which leads the individual to eat or feel hungry constantly, sometimes eating the family into poverty, and a child being, oh, this is a good one, a child being suspiciously intelligent. Like if your kid's like weirdly smart, they might not be a human. So look out for that. No smart kids allowed. Something wrong with them. They probably ask too many questions is what it is. Anyway, the most common method used to prevent fairies from abducting a child is to leave something made of iron in or around an infant's crib. It is widely accepted that fairies can be harmed by contact with iron and that they will avoid it at all costs. It is hoped that by placing iron near the child, it can deter fairies from targeting them. The iron is often in the form of tongs or other tools. Horseshoes are a common one. Some would also leave a Bible in the crib or the bed with the child, and depending on the individual's religious beliefs, this could also keep fairies at bay. Once again, it's interesting for someone to believe in fairies and also be Christian. That's interesting because it's like a meld of the Abrahamic religion and the pagan religion. And it's always neat. It's like the fusion dance, but with a belief system. Whatever. In Ireland, it was said that if someone envied new parents or a baby, someone was like, man, I wish I had that baby, it would make the family a target for the fairies. And this is why it became taboo to speak any words of envy concerning the beauty or temperament of a child, or of the relationship between its parents, even for the home or the lifestyle that the family lives. So, this means that if you have a friend, and they're a happy couple, and they have a baby, you can, of course, say, yes, I'm so happy for you. But if you say anything like, man, I wish my relationship were that strong, or man, we've been trying to have a baby for the last year, or, oh, your baby is so pretty, my baby will probably look funny. You can't do that, because you're expressing envy for the family in some way. And you're putting a target on their backs, and now that baby's going to be replaced with a chunk of wood. Why would you do that to your friend? God. In some areas, it was also believed that all infants were in danger of being taken away until they sneezed for the first time. I've heard that before, too, before this. This led to a tradition of holding pepper beneath a newborn's nose in an attempt to force it to sneeze as soon as possible. I think that's funny. Others still have been of the belief that a standard baptism ritual could prevent a child's abduction by fairies or any other malicious entities. You just gotta dunk them. You gotta soak them in the Holy Spirit. You know? No big deal. Unfortunately, there were never any simple solutions to dealing with a changeling. The most peaceful known methods of getting rid of one seem to have entailed a long list of complicated and often nonsensical rituals and tasks. A Welsh account of a changeling invasion tells a story of a woman who was tickled. Wow, that's weird. Tickled to death? Anyway, and then there was another one who was tricked into getting... It didn't actually say tickled. I misread the word tricked in my notes. But don't... Yeah. I thought it would be funny, and it wasn't funny. I feel like I was misleading you. A woman was tricked into checking on her cattle when they began making sounds of distress. As she was checking on the cattle, her children were left unattended, and upon her return, it was clear to her that one of her sons was no longer himself. She believed him to be a changeling, and so she sought the guidance of a local spiritual leader who instructed her to perform a long series of tasks, which included cooking a live chicken, which had not been defeathered, and using an eggshell to brew beer. The idea behind these strange tasks was that the fairy would be so confused, shocked, or even appalled by this weird behavior that it would make a remark that gave away its true identity. And I think that's funny. The idea of confusing a changeling so much that it reveals itself presents an air of whimsy that people prefer to associate with stories of fairies and otherworldly creatures. Sadly, the more common means of chasing off an unwelcome fairy interloper was to simply beat it viciously. It was believed that if a fairy were subjected to constant or savage physical torment, or in threat of being killed, then it would leave and allow the original person to return to their body and take their place back. They'd be like, this sucks. It's not worth it. This sucks. I'm leaving, you guys. I'll find another one, you know? Make it so uncomfortable that it just fucks off. If the fairy did not leave of its own accord while being beaten or having its life threatened, it was likely that the other fairies would come to take it back, for they would be unable to bear watching one of their own suffer. They would come to save it from you, is the idea. When these methods proved ineffective, it was widely accepted that killing the fairy by fire or by drowning it would allow the kidnapped human to return the following day. See the case of Bridget Cleary and her husband Michael saying that by burning her, he could get his real wife back. There we go. All that one needed to do was confirm that the suspect was indeed a changeling, and then set them aflame or hold them underneath the water, therefore saving the life of their loved one, who would then be able to return from the fairy world. That's all well and good. If it is a fairy, how often do you think it was actually a fairy? How many times do you think that someone was killed because they were a fairy, and that the original person did indeed return safely the next day? If anyone wants to look into that, that would be cool. Belief in fairies, changelings, and other pagan entities remained strong throughout the UK, even following widespread Christian conversion, like I said. Although the majority of the population eventually followed Christian values and disavowed any belief in the supernatural or witchcraft, fear remained strong of those who practiced magic, and of those who consorted with or who may have been magical in nature. Man, I cannot breathe this morning. My downstairs neighbors just moved in, and they decided that they needed to do the nasty at 4 a.m. I was going to sleep for a few more hours, but that happened, and I have really good hearing, so I'm recording instead. So that probably has something to do with my throat not working, and I apologize for that, but there's very little I can do. And I'll tell you more about that later. Alright. The early modern witch craze spread through the UK in the 17th century, and throughout that period, and the decades following it, persecution of anyone who was believed to be non-Christian was the thing that they did. Rampant, as they say. There was fear throughout the entire culture, which led to lots of accusations of witchcraft, but also of people consorting with fairy folk, and of putting people in danger of being taken and replaced by changelings. It also prompted more concern over the existence and presence of supernatural beings in the mortal world. So, although everyone had mostly converted to Christianity, there were some people who maintained little bits of that belief in fairies, and then, like over 1,000 years later, after the initial conversion started in the region, in the 1700s, belief in those fairies, those like old cultural traditions and belief systems, were ignited by the witch craze and brought back to the forefront of people's like brains, right? And they started thinking about the fairies again, and they're like, if there's this witch, then I bet there's fairies too, right? Anyway, as one can imagine, with such widespread belief and fear of fairies, changelings, and associated forms of witchcraft at the time, many people were accused of being changelings during the 1700s and 1800s and earlier. In many cases, the results were relatively harmless. Children were baptized or exorcised of the evil forces and were believed to have been purified or returned to their homes, having swapped with the changeling who had tried to take their place. Unfortunately, because it was so widely believed that physical abuse was the best way to chase away a changeling, many people, especially children, were forced to suffer brutal abuse when they seemed to be acting differently, or if they grew ill. So many of the traits and descriptions of changelings can now be explained by certain medical conditions, mental health problems, or cognitive disorders. For example, now let's see if I can pronounce this, phenylketonuria. Phenylketonuria is a genetic disorder that affects the metabolism, and it is very common among people of Irish and English descent. This disorder has many symptoms that express themselves much like those of being a changeling in the old lore. It was said that if a child looks like an old man, they may be a fairy. An infant appearing old can also be called by progeria, a genetic disorder that causes children to age very quickly, making them lose their hair and appear old within the first few years of their life. The signs of being a changeling weren't only physical, however, and many of the behavioral changes that were associated with being switched out with the fairy could have simply been cases of depression, impaired cognitive development, the onset of anxiety, and from simply having a difficult personality. Like, if someone could just be cranky, just wake up one day and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna be a dick, I'm sick of you guys, you know? Fairy. You know? One of the most upsetting realities to come to light in modern times is that many children were very likely accused of being changelings and were punished, abused, or even killed because of it. However, much of the behaviors and characteristics that could make someone be called a changeling, especially way back then, are actually just signs of things like autism and just anxiety, depression, you know? Normal shit that people simply didn't understand before. Changelings have remained significant cultural and religious staples among people throughout the world, but particularly those in Western Europe. They may be a manifestation of anxieties inherent in parenthood, such as the fear of having your child taken from you, going missing, or being harmed. Fairies have been a scapegoat for missing persons cases, sudden deaths, and unexplained illnesses since before recorded history. People have been blaming fairies for anything weird that they can't explain. It's a rational explanation for someone who believes that these mischievous and even malevolent otherworldly entities are living among us. What is even more frightening than these creatures, however, is the brutality that the belief in them has pushed humans to adopt. Changelings are scary from a folkloric perspective, you know, but scarier than that is the fact that people were burning their children alive and beating each other savagely because of it, and I believe using it as an excuse to do so sometimes. And it really highlights that humans can fucking suck. You know what I'm saying? And there you have my little, honestly pretty shallow dive into Changelings. I hope it was enjoyable. Now I'm going to tell you, if anyone's interested, about my big changes coming soon. So, a lot of you, well, maybe not. If you know me from the clock app, then you may have found me like 3 or 4 years ago when I lived outside. And since then, I have been living in a stable home for about 2 years. I completed my master's degree in history, and I got my first little baby job using that degree recently, teaching civics to kids. Well, that job is part-time, and it's seasonal, so it will be over in June. And due to circumstances beyond my control, mostly the way credit systems are set up, and I don't know. Basically, I'm going to be living in a van starting next month. I am pre-recording some episodes, so I have time to adjust, but I will soon be recording my episodes from a van. I have acquired internet that will work, and I have acquired, it's coming soon, solar power. So it'll be questionable. We're not sure how it's gonna go, but I am 100% not going to stop doing this or making content. And maybe my shorts feed, maybe my shorts videos will be about the van life stuff that I'll be doing. I used to live in my 95 Yukon, Sergeant Detritus, and I remember people kind of enjoyed my adventures there. I won't be traveling, though. I'll be sticking around in my state because my partner has a steady full-time job, so we need that, because there are also children who need to be cared for, but we cannot live in a house. So rental agencies, they don't accept dogs, and if anyone knows me, my corn dog, I got him as a baby over 7 years ago, and he is the light of my life and my reason for living. But he is a pit bull mastiff mix, and he weighs 100 pounds. So I would rather die than be rid of him, and have in the past chosen to be homeless with him rather than in a house without him. So rental agencies tend to not accept dogs. The very few that do accept dogs don't accept dogs over 20 pounds, and the even fewer of those who do accept dogs over 20 pounds don't accept certain breeds, which is like most of the breeds that are over 20 pounds, but Corn and Kali, my dogs, are restricted breeds. And of the one rental agency that we found in this area that does accept pit bulls, they are really, really picky about the credit. And you cannot have, for example, charge-offs on your credit report from having done a debt consolidation program in the last 7 years to rent from them. So we thought we were going to be able to buy a house because I should qualify for down payment assistance, being a first-time home buyer, and but because my job is seasonal and part-time, I cannot be the main person on a loan, and my partner has technically owned a home in the last 3 years despite having lost it in a divorce. So basically we're totally screwed regardless of what we do, unless I can make like $3,000 a month. Otherwise, we're just gonna live in the van. That's fine. But I'll be recording from a van. We have about 3 more weeks in this apartment before all that happens, so I'm getting rid of all my stuff. We'll have like a small storage unit for like my sentimental things and maybe some of my books, because I had the biggest library of books. I had been collecting books since I was a child, and then every time I was homeless or something, I would leave them at my mom's house or at my sister's house or whatever. And then I finally got them all with me when I was living in a house before the last time I was living outside, and I had them all, and there were hundreds, and they were beautiful, and it was my life's work this collection of books. And then when I lost my living situation then, I did everything I could to keep them and I couldn't. So I gave them all away. I was able to keep a small box of them, and I lost my entire giant library that I had saved up my entire life. And now I have this, which is still almost nothing compared, but I'm not getting rid of it again. I'm not losing it again. So, storage unit. So, cool thing, I have never been houseless. I've never been living outside before with any kind of income at all. So this is gonna be like weirdly easy for me compared. But anyway, it will affect you potentially. It might muck up my upload schedule depending on internet availability. I'll be having to get a new microphone because this is huge, and my background might be the woods. So otherwise it shouldn't affect you too much as a viewer, a follower, or whatever. But if you want to follow my TikTok, I'll probably be posting personal updates and more life stuff there as things get going. And maybe I'll just do shorts here too for you if y'all are interested in that. The people who watch the shorts on YouTube are not the same people who watch my TikTok videos. I don't know what that's about. Maybe the YouTube algorithm hasn't figured me out yet. Anyway, so that's my big stuff. Good stuff. If you want to support me, if I could manage to make $3,000 a month somehow so I could have a home, but anything at all really will help with gas, because there will be a lot of driving. Gas. I'm the one in charge of the dogs because they're my dogs, so like vet bills, they're both on anxiety medication. Phone service, stuff like that. You can join my Patreon, you know. I'll link it here, and click the subscribe button if you think that would be fun for you to see more of my videos. Give a like to the video so it gets boosted, because that helps a lot, and comment down below. Talk to me about changelings. Talk to me about van life. Have you ever lived in a van? I've never lived in a nice van. So yeah, tell me what it do. Give me a boost. Share the love. And I would like to thank my patrons, if I may, because y'all are fantastic. My patrons are Michael Matei, it's my boy, Smoothie, Patrick Finnegan, Walter Fate, and Dale. And then also, of course, thanks to everyone in my free tier on my Patreon, because even if you cannot contribute financially, I appreciate that you just care enough to be there, and then you give comments and you can answer questions in polls and get personal updates and things like that. So if you want me to say your name at the end of a video, you can also join that for $1 or more. Alright, there we go. So that's Changelings. That's my crazy life update. Hell yeah, brother. Don't die.